Welcome back, Flow State podcast listeners. Today we are diving into a topic that I'm truthfully, and I was just saying this, a little bit nervous to talk about. So I think that it'll be a really interesting episode. We have an amazing guest, Claire, who is the CEO and co founder of Flourish. Flourish is an app that helps women break the diet cycle and sustain healthy habits through expert counseling, accountability, and community support. Today, we are diving into all things intuitive eating, diet culture, and nutritional freedom. Claire, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. And I hope that we get to dig into maybe some things that do make you nervous to talk about. Because I think that, as we discussed, what you're feeling is probably what a lot of people are feeling. And I hope that this can be a safe space for us all to chat and learn and talk about stuff that might be kind of hard to talk about.
Yes, so excited. I'd love for you to just kind of start us off by introducing yourself and share with us what it is exactly that you do and how you got into your work.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my company is called Flourish. And founding Flourish for me was pretty, I guess, autobiographical, I guess you could say. I'm a registered dietitian by trade. That's what I went to school for. I have a degree in nutrition. But what got me there was actually the fact that I started dieting at the age of just 13 years old. I grew up in a larger body, certainly larger than my peers, and that was a really big challenge, especially from like a psychological and emotional standpoint. My mom, bless her heart, has never struggled with weight in that way in her life. She's also a CPA, so she's a very kind of 1 + 1 = 2 approach to things. So, of course, I'm 13 years old. I'm having breakdowns in the limited two dressing room, and she says, okay, well, if my daughter's struggling with her weight, she needs to just eat less, exercise more, kind of the common paradigm around weight. Let's get her into Weight Watchers. So I started Weight Watchers at 13, spent the next 10 years on pretty much every diet you can name. Certainly would have been considered someone who had disordered eating, although I didn't really have language for that at the time. And then fast forward, I kind of found my way, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. I spent the first 4 years of my career at a startup based here in Austin, and then quit that role to start working with women, to start counseling women on their relationship with food, nutrition, and that was my first business, Nutritional Freedom, and then that ultimately served as the kind of inspiration for Flourish, which brings technology into the solution, I guess, to allow us to achieve just reach more people.
I'm super curious. It's interesting to hear you talk about your story with your mom and like the differences. And I feel like my story to building my business is very similar, where it wasn't like misguidance per se from the mother figure, but it was just like they didn't know any different.
Yeah.
And what is that conversation like with your mom today?
It's really sweet. She's so proud of the work that we're doing and the impact that we're having, on the lives of women. I don't know that she fully gets it,
Yeah.
because she doesn't have, again, that same like kind of personal struggle that I had, that the women that we work with had, but she recognizes that I struggled, that the decision that she made, it was the best that she could with the information that she had at the time, and it
Yeah.
wasn't ultimately the right decision for me. And so it's clear, I think, to her as well as almost everyone I talk to, that there needs to be some kind of alternative approach to how we think about our nutrition. I don't know why nutrition in the I don't know, like kind of out in society. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but it doesn't make sense to me that nutrition and diet
Right.
have become synonymous, and that for so many women we assume that eating well just means eating less, and we really need like a totally different approach to nutrition, which is what we're up to at Flourish.
Yeah, love that.
I could
I
not
I
agree
think it
more.
can just be like such a sensitive thing too, their with their
Yeah.
mothers and that relationship where we're like being like, I didn't learn this growing up, so now like I want other women to know it. And I know I've definitely had conversations with my mom where she's like, "Oh, like I take it a little personal." And I'm like, "Understandable.
Yeah.
100%." Like,
Yeah.
and it's not like I just try to remind her that it's not her fault, but it is an interesting kind of like family dynamic, if you will.
Totally. I had to do a lot of my own healing around it before I could really, I think, talk about it in a way that was more empathetic towards my mom and what
Yeah.
she was experiencing. She didn't put me on Weight Watchers because she hated me. She put me on Weight Watchers
Mm.
because she loved me and she didn't know better, you know? And so I
Right.
had to, that's where like my own personal work, I think, has contributed to the, the story, I guess.
I really had a polar opposite experience and feel grateful for that. Even Monica and I have talked about like we were in an aesthetic sport. I was a gymnast for all of my upbringing, and food was never really talked about at home. I modeled really good behaviors. I didn't even know what eating disorders were until I went to
Wow.
school. And my classmates were struggling with their own relationship to food, and that's why they were studying nutrition. I'm curious if that was kind of part of your story. But I just had such a awakening when I encountered that. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, you're trying to hack the system by learning more about nutrition so that you can eat less and restrict your body. Like,
Yeah.
my heart just broke for these people, and I just felt so naive, like had no exposure to it beforehand, and so much compassion around that. And I've heard a similar story to yours before. Everybody's story is unique, of course, but I really hope that conversation is changing. Like, I do hope that people our age now who have maybe had these lived experiences and have had to do a lot of work overcoming this, or we're not relying on that yo-yo dieting or that thin obsessiveness. Now I'm speaking from a white, thin, privileged, able body, and
Sure.
I also want to call that out. It's not fair. um, but I really hope that this conversation is beginning to change, and especially parenting styles in the US. And it sounds like your work is really helping to contribute towards that. So I'm really excited to hear more about it.
Yeah, one thing we say about Flourish is, it's not like our tagline by any means, but I do think that part of the work that we're doing is putting an end to intergenerational dieting. We primarily work with millennial women, I would say, it kind of makes up most of our customer base, and we're doing a lot of healing around the, relationship between them and their mom and food. And then a lot of it is also, okay, I don't want to pass this down to my
Mm-hmm.
future children, especially my future daughters. That's when we have women coming into us who are in the plan, family planning stages, or they're pregnant. I mean, I've had members whose daughters are like not even quite one yet. So it almost feels like there is this, the clock is ticking. Like I need
Mm-hmm.
to work on this before my daughter is sort of aware enough to absorb what I'm up to when it comes to food in my body. So it's yeah,
It
it's a real
starts
thing.
so early, and I don't think some recognize that. Like, even just having family meals together,
Yeah.
also a privileged thing, but even parents modeling, like, eating different types of foods, showing you how to chew different things. I worked in pediatrics for a while, and
Cool.
that is, you know, kids are mirroring everything that their parent is doing. So if you're not eating with them, if you are restricting, if you're making comments about your body, if you're any of those things, I don't think we realize how early that really starts to impact people. So I love hearing that. It sounds like that kind of family planning stage is like, oh my gosh, okay, I really need to deal with this.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a big change from our generation that we can all feel good about.
Claire, when was it in your journey that you realized that your experience with food, your relationship with food, the dieting that you'd experienced, being on Weight Watchers was not a good thing?
Yeah. So I reached the peak of my dieting or disordered eating in college when I was studying to become a registered dietitian. And I think I knew psychologically that it was not going well. I knew that I was eating in a very different way from my friends and my roommates. I was weighing and tracking food, and um, I felt very isolated from my friends in
Mm-hmm.
that way. And then also on the weekends, I would find myself binging. So I knew that that was the case, but my kind of big wake up call, I had actually hit my like goal weight. And of course, I was like, not still not happy. It wasn't this what a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that I thought it was going to unlock confidence and a boyfriend and like a job offer. And like, of course it didn't, because I wasn't ultimately at peace with myself. So I thought, okay, I just need to, maybe a few more pounds will do it. But at that point, my body started pushing back and was kind of like, we're not going to lose any more weight. You're going to keep doing the same things, but body is not moving. So I went and got my metabolic rate tested, which you can do. It's a breathing test, and the results came back. And I remember it was a dietitian. She told me your metabolic rate is that of like a woman in menopause. And I was young and active and all these things that should not have indicated that. And that was my wake up call of, oh, this cycle that's not working for me mentally and emotionally is also now harming me on a physical level. And that is when I started my process of unlearning everything and relearning how to approach my nutrition and health in a way that didn't have these negative side effects.
Would you say that the methods that you like the methods of unlearning and the process you went through are something that like came out in your work, in your nutritional freedom program, now in Flourish? Is that kind of like how it developed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely started with my lived experience, because I don't know, at the time, I don't know that I like knew any differently or knew any
Mm-hmm.
better. Um, and then it was a matter of, it was like I had my lived experience and that informed some of it,
Yeah.
but I was still living in the world that we all live in. And when I started Nutritional Freedom, which was my prior business, essentially a nutrition counseling practice, I thought it would be more about teaching women about healthy foods and healthy recipes and kind of what I had gone to school to learn. And that in the first, even just few months of running that business was a big wake up call because I learned that I was shocked to find so many people's stories sounded just like mine. I and then with that, these women kind of knew what to do. They knew that, vegetables and Brussels sprouts are more nutrient dense than ice cream. And yet we're still finding themselves kind of downing pints of ice cream at a time. So
Mm-hmm.
I heard often like, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. I saw the ways in which the struggles with food were not a result of a knowledge deficit or even in some cases a resource deficit, as much as it was about the psychological and emotional components, and then also related the body image piece. And that was when I was like, oh, this is going to be different than I thought it might be. And my story is actually informing this work more than I thought it would. But I also recognized areas in which I needed to develop more as a professional. I recognized areas in which I needed to bring on team. So very quickly we began to bring on mindset coaches, whether that, these have been PhD students. We have had therapists operating as our mindset coaches, just to make sure that we're addressing kind of like the full spectrum of people's challenges and barriers with food.
This is like it's so validating to hear that. I'm really glad that more people are practicing that way. And I say like the deeper I get into this work, I feel like the less I'm focused on nutrition. Like I don't truly identify as a dietitian anymore because so much of this work is just healing your relationship to your body, healing and trying to understand typically the root of eating disorders, disordered eating patterns is because it's a area that we can control. We can control what we eat, we can control how we move our bodies, but that's not the root. Maybe it is your relationship to your body, or maybe it was childhood traumas or even adult traumas, and any of those things, but unpacking that and just trying to help people understand, unpack, unlearn, relearn these more healthful behaviors. But having that support system, having people that can help process those emotions while you're going through it is so much more than just follow this meal plan and adequately nourish your body and you're going to feel better.
Totally.
I love that.
Yeah. And it's not that nutrition doesn't play a role, which is why, like, Monica, I've
Totally.
loved your content and bringing awareness to things like protein, for example. Like, I'm always looking at, okay, what are the behaviors a member is engaging in? We'll use an example. A problem behavior that a member will come to Flourish experiencing is overeating at night. And there are so many different reasons someone might be overeating at night. It could be something that something that's happening on the physiological front that's causing that. So maybe you're under eating during the day. Maybe you're on a blood sugar roller coaster all day, and that's why. It could be a psychological thing. Also related to that, like you're kind of running out of willpower at the end of the day. It could be emotional. You're eating in response to stress. It could be a social thing. This is the one time of day that you're eating either by yourself or with someone else, right? So we have to approach it in a multifactorial way. And I think we all want food and our food choices to be like rational. I think about food and money. I think our relationship with money and our relationship with food is like exactly the same. And there's this whole field of behavioral economics that's about people doing weird shit with money that they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And we're the exact same way with food. And yet most solutions on the market today are like, well, just if you just know how many calories are in this, you should be good. Like you should be good to go, right? And it's like, no, that's not how it works. We're not rational eaters.
Yeah, the money food thing, that's so interesting because I've also heard recently money and relationships be related to each other as well. And I mean, I think it just at the end of the day is like our relationship to anything, right?
Yeah,
Like we can have poor relationships to just about anything.
100%.
And there are so many different factors. I mean, someone could have higher cortisol at the end of the day, like you're saying, increased stress, and that can lead us to eat. Or I also just think societally, like we've been taught, at least I feel like this in my life, that like dinner is the biggest meal. We get together
Mhm.
as a family and we eat dinner together. And like morning, we're rushing to get out the door. Lunch,
Yeah,
we're, in the middle of our day. So it just inevitably. And so, yeah, like our relationship to that is very wild, I guess.
totally. It's fascinating. It's so fascinating to me.
I'd love to kind of just dig in and let's just talk about diet culture as a whole. In your world, in your mind, like what is diet culture?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of definitions of diet culture kind of floating around. Um, I think the best that I've seen talk about are the ones that I guess resonate the most with me, and then also the women that I work with, is that diet culture is a shared belief that essentially thinner is better, and that pursuit should be put ahead of the pursuit of health and well-being. Um,
Mm,
and I think diet culture kind of shows up and manifests itself in so many different ways. And it kind of is for, I think, most of us at this point, except for like maybe Nora and your upbringing. It's kind of like the air that we breathe,
yeah.
especially. And I know we're going to talk potentially a little bit about social media, but we're kind of inundated with these messages unless we've kind of somehow managed to go through the world unscathed by it. I also think that there are some things that get labeled as diet culture that I don't necessarily agree with. So I think people's interactions with diet culture may be a little bit different, but it's certainly something to be aware of as you're navigating your own nutrition and health journey.
Yeah. Are you open to sharing something that you see get labeled as diet culture that like you don't believe is?
Yeah. So, like, for example, I have like, this is like such a very specific example. But I saw a dietitian on Instagram putting frozen cauliflower in her smoothie, which is like one of my favorite things to do. And it's not because I hate myself, it's not because I'm like desperate to lose weight. I like really enjoy the texture that and the volume that it adds to a smoothie. I love that it's a source of vegetables and X, Y, and Z reasons that I love it. And I think she had said that people had left comments saying like, "Oh, that's diet culture," and I didn't think that you were about that sort of thing. It's like, again, the I think it's so important that we separate the behavior or the action
Hmm.
or the facts putting cauliflower in the smoothie from the motivation and intention behind it.
Mm,
Exactly. That, I mean, that's like, the definition of orthorexia really is like the behaviors themselves in one person can be totally fine, but the behaviors in someone else's body or thoughts behind that action can be disordered. And I think that's where it's really hard. Like, just as a caveat, like, none of these things are limited to body size, shape at all, or
Totally.
gender. Just calling that out as well. But yeah, that, like, the motivation behind it is the reason.
Yeah. And yeah, totally.
I mean, let's maybe talk about that. So, like, a motivation that is negative would be,
Like, I'm doing this to change my body shape or size. I see that as, like, if that's
but
a direct intention.
is that necessarily, like, we have to control things as well. I mean, I don't know, maybe this is even the wrong way of thinking about it, but like, say you were like, I want to change my body composition. That doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. I mean, I think that in a lot of instances, that can also be a very healthy thing. Um, and so in that instance, you're like, you are trying to change your body. I
Yeah.
don't see, I think this is where the line gets really blurry for me is like, if we are someone who's motivated, if you are someone who's motivated to make a change in your body, you're like, I want to be stronger. I want to be more fit. I want to run this race. I want to lift this much weight. I like that doesn't necessarily have to be, in my mind, a negative and or unhealthy desire, but in someone else's mind, it can be,
Yeah.
right?
I asked the question of worth. Like, do you think your
Okay.
worth changes based on your existing body? Like, what is your relationship to yourself if you were to stay the same versus what's going to change if you were to be in a different body shape or size? Like, for me, I focus more on feelings. Like, if you feel stronger, how is that also going to show up in other areas of your life? Are you going to
Hmm.
be more confident? Are you going to have more energy? Are you going to feel better? It doesn't have to be tied to necessarily a physical change. For that's my opinion personally.
Yeah, I was gonna basically echo the same thing. I don't necessarily feel I feel like we have to dig a little bit deeper into, okay, I'm going to engage in this behavior to generate this change in my physique. Um, I think you're exactly right, Monica. For some people, that can be a really like positive experience, and for other people, it can be a really negative experience. And I think you're
Yeah.
exactly right, Nora. One kind of way to the litmus test for that is, what do you believe will change as a result of achieving that physical change? And how does that make you feel? Like, there's just so many layers, and I think
Yeah.
we want one clean cut answer. Like, this is healthy, this is unhealthy, this is diet culture, this is anti diet culture. And I think that makes a ton of sense in terms of social media and messaging and marketing and all that stuff. But I think people, human beings who are just trying to do the best that they can, get really lost in the mix of all that.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a role to be that was created from the food industry itself? I mean, I look at like my parents' generation and still to this day I'm like trying to educate them that low fat foods like the whole low fat food movement, it was like, okay, let's decrease the fat and increase the sugar in this. And so like from a nutritional standpoint, it's not better. Uh, but everyone wanted to change their physique, and so less fat became the trend. Like how did that play a role in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a food historian, Nora. You may have like more, I don't know, facts and figures related to this. I think the way I think about it is the diet industry and the food industry, they're both for-profit industries. We live in a
Yeah.
capitalistic society. I think it would be naive and probably like delusional to not believe that there's some connection between the two. And I think as time goes on, it just becomes like more chicken and the egg. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my not super informed take. Again, not it's not I'm not a food historian. I don't know, Nora, if you've kind of looked more into it.
Not numbers. I had a couple classes at NYU around this, but I I think what's really interesting is even just seeing over the decades how different shapes are worshipped. Like in even colonial times, women in larger bodies were worshipped. They were seen as wealthy, they were seen as healthy, fertile people because they were in larger bodies. That meant they had access to food and resources. Similar to even people, if you got a tan when you were back in the day, that was seen as like you were a laborer, you were a day worker, you were out in the field, so you're poor. Now, like if you have a tan, you're perceived as wealthy or someone that can afford vacations and to go to faraway lands. Like these things change over time,
Yeah.
but I do think there was a really big shift in like 80s, especially with a lot of processed food items that started occurring, and even connection between pharmaceutical industry picking up, now like the connections between hospitals even having contracts with companies like Nestle and Pepsi and all of these, like things are so deeply interconnected. Our system here in the US is very corrupt, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of these things are just starting to come to light. Like the whole premise behind the food pyramid previously
Yeah.
was that to consume the most grains as possible, and dairy was very high on that list as well, and that was to support dairy farms and the meat industry and the grain industry. So like if you compare ours in the US to other countries, they're completely different even in the same time period. So it's not that we don't have access to the same information, it's definitely us being swayed. Some of that might be my own interpretation and opinion, but that's kind of how I see things.
I want to dig into a little bit, maybe
It's
like,
like how to unpack that.
yeah, I mean, that's like a lot, but
It
That's
is
a
a lot.
it's a separate podcast,
Yeah.
honestly.
yeah.
But it
And like
does
how to
relate to diet culture. Like
oh
it
totally.
really it does. And like I just think this whole new turn of the century with media, with this more accessibility to comparison, we're entering into a whole different time period where even you and I, all the three of us, did not grow up with a cell phone in our hand with
Totally.
access to Facebook and MySpace. You had to like
Yeah.
log in for an hour. And now kids have 24-hour access to a device where they can be looking at things on TikTok, on Snapchat, like Instagram, everything, and just comparing ourselves. So I think like we're entering in a totally different time.
Yeah.
And it's just created these two extremes. Like I was saying before we started recording, like I'm uncomfortable in the whole spectrum because it's like I myself feel comfortable, but it's that constant worry of like, am I going to make someone else uncomfortable? And I
Yeah.
think that social media, it's so easy for people to comment. And like you were talking about, Claire, with that dietitian, it's like, she was just sharing, like, this is how I love to get vegetables in my smoothie, which, like, for the greater population, like, if you can sneak vegetables into a smoothie and someone who normally doesn't eat vegetables is going to eat a vegetable, like, that's a win in my
Right.
mind.
Right.
But people are labeling this as diet culture and people can just fire off whatever they want in the comments. Like, have you seen other examples of that being really harmful? And how do we, as people on social media, keep talking about what's like us, but not trigger other people?
Oh, I don't
You're
know if that's
never gonna
possible.
not trigger somebody.
I know,
I
but
always say
you
like
know what I
there's
mean?
always
It's
the
like,
person to write a negative Yelp review. Like you could go to the best restaurant in the entire world, have the best experience. Somebody is always gonna leave a negative review, right? And like detaching from that. What's your North Star? Why do you
Yeah.
share this info in the first place? Not how people are gonna interpret it. You can't control their
and I
response to
think
your
that that's
reaction.
why, like, Claire, the work you're doing is so important because you're teaching individuals how to address their emotional response
Mm-hmm.
in this
Mm-hmm.
space. So I'd love for you to maybe just talk to us about what that looks like with people who are in your programming and how you work with them to change their emotional response or their experience.
Yeah, so everyone's journey is a little bit different, of course. but the way it starts is with a really deep understanding of like, how did we get here? What's going on and how did we get here? Over time, we are not typically people's first rodeo in nutrition, diet, trying to eat healthier, trying to lose weight, whatever it is. So it's really important that we understand the history. What are the influences at play, both historical and current? So, is this stuff that your mom handed down? How aware of that are you? Do you have a wedding coming up? Is that kind of an external maybe pressure that you're facing to change your body? And really just getting like a lay of the land. This is also something I learned through just my experience as a practitioner. I think early in my career working with clients, I wanted to rush into like solutioning and like, let's spot the problem and fix it right away. And that did not work. It's really important that we get this like strong foundation in place. And through that process, our members start to like connect some dots like, oh, this is why I do that thing. And oh, this is where that belief comes from. And it's really cool because we're doing it. It's, of course, all virtual, but it's kind of like in coaching sessions, you get to take a pause from the swirling thoughts you have in your head about food, from the constant, scroll of eat this way and that way and look like this and don't do that and, all that. And so it's this, kind of safe space to explore that. So once we have kind of a lay of the land, it's about, I'm always thinking about what can we do for like, what is the smallest change we can make for the maximum benefit? Which is a big mindset shift for a lot of our members. A lot of our members are used to like, okay, on Monday, I'm starting 75 hard. In January, I'm going to do the whole 30 for the 75th time. And I hope it's going to be different this time. Like they're used to these total life overhauls, which sound so sexy and fun and exciting and never work. And then it sucks and like the cycle starts all over again. So I'm like, let's do this a totally different way. What is like the smallest change that you can make to have the greatest benefit? Typically that starts with moving into a phase of what we call kind of nutritional stabilization. So let's make sure that you're just eating enough of all three macronutrients and seeing how that quells some of the chaotic eating patterns that our members experience. And then from that state of kind of this like being more stable nutritionally and having less chaos, then we can begin to do the deeper work and really address more of like the unlearning and the healing. And it kind of just evolves over time, I guess.
I love that. And I imagine it sounds like there might be a community aspect to this. And what I've seen in my programs is that community being so powerful, just to hear
Totally.
like, wow, my experience is not unique. Like, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was the only one that has this story, and just having some allyship in that is so beautiful and so powerful and also motivating. Then
Yeah.
you're a source of accountability for other people in the room instead of doing this journey on your own. It's like, no, I want to heal my relationship to my body and to food so that I can be an example to my granddaughter, my daughter, my friend, my mom,
Yeah.
even, and show up for this group in a totally different manner too. I love that dynamic so much.
Totally.
I have a question.
Would you
Sarah.
say, oh, go ahead.
Do you like provide some resources in the beginning? Because I feel like that's a big thing that I get asked initially is like, are there recipe ideas? Are there things like, what should I be doing? And that's where nutrition is so individualized that
Yep.
we're not just handing out blanket meal plans and saying like, yeah, if you eat this way, you're going to feel better. No problem. Simple. Like if that were the case, these problems would not exist. I'm curious what that portion kind of looks like.
Yeah, so I would say it definitely depends on the member and their history and how will this person relate to having some kind of more guidelines around nutrition. And that's, been an evolution among the team. So I work with a very, very small amount of clients one-on-one at this point. But I have a team who works, that's kind of their primary role, I guess. And recognizing we work together once a week, me and my fellow coaches, and talk about our different clients. And that's been like such a cool experience to like really firsthand, or maybe secondhand, I guess, see like, wow, people really are different. And like this recommendation that I'm making to Aaron would not be appropriate for Lindsay, or, whatever the case may be. And so my kind of call to action to our coaches is meet your members where they are. Like if there is someone who could really benefit from having some more nutrition guidelines, from having some sort of like structure around like a meal template, perhaps like something that's going to be flexible, please like create that resource for them, give them that, kind of that bridge, and also coach them around how to relate to this tool, right? Okay, if we give you a meal plan or a meal template, how do you think and feel about yourself if you don't follow it perfectly? Oh, that can actually be a big learning for someone.
Yeah.
Rather than just saying like, no, we don't do meal plans. Sorry, like that's diet culture. You know what I mean? Like that, this is where, again, I talk about that black and white mentality, which is actually symptomatic of diet culture, of the patriarchy, of white supremacy, is sometimes you see it just as much in like the anti-diet culture. And I'm just like, I love the gray. I live
That's
in the
exactly
gray.
what I say.
Yeah.
I love that. And where does, okay, this is like the buzzword, I feel like, intuitive eating. Like everyone's talking about intuitive eating. And Nora, I think I've heard you even say like, I promote intuitive eating, that kind of thing before. Can we define this, intuitive eating? Because
Yeah.
I think oftentimes people are like, intuitive eating, it just means like I listen to my body and I eat whatever I want. And for some people that would be like gorging ice cream.
Hmm.
And is gorging ice cream going to nutritionally fulfill someone? Probably not. So
Yeah.
like where's the gray on that?
Yeah. Do you want me to take this one, Nora?
I'm happy to add to, but I would say that's not it. That's not
Yeah.
it.
I know that's not it, but I'm
I
curious to
think
hear from you guys.
yeah, I think, okay, I feel like when I talk about intuitive eating, I am talking about, the way I distinguish it is like capital I, capital E, intuitive eating. It is a framework that was created by two dietitians. There are 10 principles that are part of this framework, and like hundreds of studies that support its efficacy and use. Then there's lowercase intuitive eating, and the sort of social media version of intuitive eating, which is exactly what you said, Monica. Eat whatever you want, whenever you want, which is actually part of why I don't talk a lot about intuitive eating, because it's not my job to inform people what intuitive eating is. I'm not like I don't know, a representative of intuitive eating. I'm not a certified intuitive eating counselor, although we do have coaches on the Flourish platform who are, and they're wonderful, practitioners and ambassadors and things like that. But I think it's important to like make that distinction,
I didn't know
because
that.
they're,
I love that.
yeah, really quite different. And capital I, capital E intuitive eating is a framework. There's 10 principles, and it's really about integrating instinct, emotion, and rational thought in your approach to food. So like, what is your body like naturally kind of bringing you to emotionally? What is it that you need to feel well? And then let's bring in some rational thought. So I always use the example of like a cupcake, right? A cupcake in intuitive eating is a perfectly acceptable food. And as someone who is an intuitive eater, I recognize I can eat a cupcake. I can eat a cupcake whenever I want. Am I going to eat a cupcake before my workout? This is where the rational thought comes in. No, for me, that's like not going to leave me feeling my best. I might not even be hungry for it. And there's so many other foods that I could choose to use as like a pre-workout snack that would fuel my body better. And that's like my lived experience of intuitive eating. And I think it can be very individual. I'm curious, Nora, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I think, Monica, your kind of thought process of like, would that mean somebody gorging on? Well, if you've been restricting yourself, or if you haven't been tuning into your body and listening for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, maybe initially, and that's kind of like, you're going to get sick of it eventually. And that is part of the capital IE principles, is when you allow all foods, then you're releasing the power that they may have over you. And it's like a sweater. You buy a new sweater, you wear it 5 days a week, and then that sweater sits in your closet. You get over the specialness that sweater once had. And this is kind of similar how I see it. But my big take on the intuitive eating space is because of diet culture. Like, we're living in our heads. We're not really connected to our body. And my mission is helping people feel at home in their bodies. And what that means to me is helping to reconnect to those sensations and being able to tune in. Oh, okay, I'm starting to feel hunger. I'm going to do something about that, instead of diet culture being like, oh, I'm not hungry. I ate an hour ago. I shouldn't need to eat again. I'm going to have some water. I'm going to chew a piece of gum. I'm going to have a coffee. I'm going to smoke a cigarette. I'm going to vape, whatever it is, to try and get rid of that thought.
Yeah.
So I think it's really just the unlearning of some of those diet behaviors, reconnecting to your body to adequately nourish, listen, call our inner wisdom, where you're able, it exceeds beyond just eating and drinking. It's honoring, when does your body need rest? When can you go? Like, different levels. We don't typically ignore when we have to go to the bathroom. Just like getting back to some routine things.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a space where someone can eat, capital I, capital E, intuitive eating, and still have physique goals, right?
I heard capital I, capital E, and then physique goals. What was in between?
Like, can they still have, physique goals? Can they still be like working towards recomping their body? Can they, I think so often, and this is social media again, like goddamn social media, but where people are practicing self-love and practicing maybe lowercase intuitive eating. And it's almost like on the other spectrum of living in an unhealthy state. So can someone like want to improve or change how they look and still be intuitive eating?
I think it's important, even in the question I heard a little bit of like conflating physique goals and health. And so I think it's important to like tease those apart. Not that they can't be related, but it's worth separating them as someone, as an individual, understands their pursuit. You can probably think of people in all shapes, sizes of bodies who are unhealthy to healthy. And even that is like a spectrum. And like, what does healthy even mean? Like, I'm someone who has anxiety and a chronic autoimmune disease. And like, I consider myself a healthy person. So anyway, that's like sort of a separate thing. So I think, for one, we need to like tease those two things apart on an individual basis. I also think that it's important, I guess, to answer your question. Yes, you can have the goals. Yes, you can have the desire to change your physique or to improve your health.
Mm-hmm.
And what does sort of intentional action towards those desires look like? And is it, realistic or possible that intuitive eating would get you there? That is going to be incredibly individual, right? Again, I think we talk a lot about the aspects of, we'll talk about physique and weight first, although the same is true for health. But like, we talk a lot and focus a lot in our culture around the aspects of our physique or the aspects of our health that are under our conscious control. Typically, that means health behaviors, what we eat, how much, how we exercise, sleep, stress management, things like that. Our health and our weight is not only under our conscious control. There are so many factors that we don't control. That's why, I think, again, I always think about other aspects of life where things are more socially acceptable, right? Like, we accept that people come in all different heights. We accept that people have different shoe sizes. But when it comes to body size, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Like, why can't we all have 6-pack abs? there's so many differences. And this is where, bio individuality comes into play, and genetics come into play. And, our environment and our access to healthcare like has an impact on physique. It has an impact on our health, and those two things can have an impact on one another. Um, I'm going to pause for a second because I feel like I've just been like rambling for a little bit, but did I answer your question at all?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I feel like it isn't like not a strange question, but also coming from someone who has never had what I believe to be a bad relationship with food. And yeah, like Nora mentioned earlier, like white, privileged, skinny female.
Yeah.
And so I have a hard time understanding the other side of it often.
Hmm.
And not because I don't like have compassion for it or
Yeah.
empathy in that state. It's just um I think often I can even post things on social media and people can be like, yeah, genetics. And I'm like, yes, 100%.
Right.
Do I also like think about nourishing my body well? Yes. And I think that from my perspective, like I do often just feel like there's a lot of tiptoeing around, hey, body composition changes and people are like, why? You're already skinny. Like, do you have a problem? And it's like, no, like this is
Hmm.
just like an interesting experiment for me. And I like to see what happens when I make these changes. So yeah, I think you did answer the question. And I think it's also just interesting to talk about and learn intuitive eating from what we see on social media versus intuitive eating, which is a um, practice that was actually created like in a more logical, scientific way, if you will.
Can
Totally.
I add? So I see when, like, if you want to be on an intuitive eating journey and you're trying to recomp your body at the same time, I kind of see those as like choosing two different roads.
Yeah.
And, we talk all about hormones here. When we make some recommendations, that's for the person that has healed their hormones and they're in a
Yeah.
place where their body could actually handle some changes, but you have to heal your hormones first. Similar concept here. If you don't have a solid foundation, solid
Hmm.
relationship to food, and you start trying to make body changes, is that going to help you achieve your goal?
Yep.
Your original goal of healing your relationship to your body, to food. That's I would just say again, like it's more about that intent behind it of like
Yeah.
it's also, if you don't think, and maybe you don't even know what quote like disordered eating thoughts or behaviors are, to even say, okay, maybe some things that I am doing are quote disordered or not healthful behaviors, or if someone else is having those thoughts, it's you can't jump into somebody else's brain, like you don't know what that looks or sounds or feels like. So, in terms of like, don't shy away from your authenticity and how you want to show up on social media to try not to offend someone, because people are going to misinterpret things, they're going to take things, like we can't control their reaction. All you can do is stay true to you, and if that means you're on this journey, there are people that are going to be absolutely drawn to that, and you've already seen that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just so excited to have this conversation, and hopefully, people listening are hearing, some differences and also understanding potentially from a standpoint of a consumer of social media that their reaction might be very different than even the person posting, right? And so it's all our individual experience. And for there to be a resource like Flourish out there for people who are reevaluating what that reaction is for them,
Yeah.
I just think that that's so, so valuable. And especially for people who are in that state of like wanting to heal their hormones and wanting to improve that. So I'm really grateful for this conversation. I think obviously you've shed a lot of light for me, as well as hopefully shed a lot of light for anyone listening, and
Yeah.
also just for that resource to exist. Like that's
Well, thank you.
really, really powerful. So we're so grateful for you for creating that and through your own shared experience. I think that's a really vulnerable place to be coming from. And amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. One thing I'll just say, kind of like to wrap up the conversation, is I don't necessarily think walking away from this conversation, anyone's goal needs to be like, okay, I need to be the perfect intuitive eater. I need to like master and perfect
Oh,
all
yeah.
these 10 steps. And like, that's not certainly like my personal approach to, I should say, my professional approach to nutrition. My goal for all of our members, and like my goal for, I guess society at large, is that we just find a way to eat in a way that we can sustain, and that we find a way to eat and fuel our bodies in a way that's supportive of our physical well-being, our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, our social well-being. And if that looks like an intuitive eating journey, great. If not, it's not the one way to eat. You know what I mean? And I think that's, part of the beauty of Flourish, and having the one-on-one support, and someone who is an expert who can kind of be your partner on the guide, can help you kind of find where you are in this space. And I think you've done such a good job of finding your own way of eating that clearly you have so much peace with internally. And it's like, of course, when you bring it to the world,
Yeah.
things get a little bit more challenging. And like that's other people's triggers to kind of like work through.
Yeah.
We can't be responsible for other people's triggers.
No, and I think that's so beautiful, and that like perfectly summarizes what you spoke on the gray area, is
Yeah.
that like Flourish isn't practicing intuitive eating or diet culture. It's like the gray, and it's individual, right?
Yeah.
Because we all have our own reactions. So to wrap up, we always do this with our
Oh yeah.
guests, our lightning round. So really, really quickly, this is a great way for our listeners to just learn a little bit more about you. But question one is, what is your favorite form of self-care?
Okay, I divided into current self-care, current self-care, and future self-care.
Oh, love that.
Current self-care, like instant gratification, I just need something right now, reality TV, specifically right now, Love is Blind.
Love it.
Future self-care is, I would say, like journaling, getting coached, working out. Not typically stuff I want to do in the moment, but I'm like grateful that I have done.
Yeah, it's what your highest self, would want
Yes.
you to have
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. But me right now, no, not interested.
I love that. I love that. Okay, favorite meal to cook. I'm interested to hear this one.
Okay, I'm in a very low cook period right now. Things are just crazy with the business. So the thing I'm making most frequently that satisfies me, like all, full spectrum, turkey sandwich, sourdough bread, good amount of turkey, avocado, a little mayo, dill Havarti cheese, thinly sliced red onion, broccoli sprouts, and tomato with a little salt and pepper. You have to salt and pepper your sandwiches and salads.
Wow, I'm blown away by the specificity
Yeah, highly specific.
of all of that, but also love hearing that you're adding a lot of turkey because I'm a
Yep.
protein girl. Morning routine or nighttime routine?
Is this like which do I prefer?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess nighttime routine actually, right now
Mm,
in this chapter.
what does that look like for you?
Um, before bed, taking my medication, magnesium, specifically magnesium glycinate, going upstairs, showering, not being on my phone, not watching TV, reading a book, sometimes journaling before bed.
Mm, yeah, I definitely exit the phone from my life at night. That's a good one.
Yeah, I don't always, but when I like need to, I really need to.
Yeah, I can tell a difference when I don't, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and last question. This is one of my favorites. A book that has had a huge impact on you.
Oh, this is so hard. I feel like a lot of mine are like business books, so I don't know how
Same.
relevant that'll be to the audience. So I'll just okay. I'll share. Traction was a big one for
My
me.
favorite. I read it every year.
Yeah, that was a big one. And I actually I like a lot of Gino Wickman's books. I like a lot of
Yeah,
his books.
same.
Yeah, I would say that one. And sorry for being boring. And hopefully you have a lot of entrepreneurs listening.
No, I mean, anyone out there, if you are considering starting a business, I highly recommend Traction. Like even
Yeah.
at any phase, it's such a good read. Amazing. Well, Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I think this has just been a really interesting conversation, and I'm really hopeful that everyone tuning in and listening has learned something and maybe just even something about themselves. Where can everyone find you and find Flourish?
So to find Flourish, head to our website, weflourish.com. And I'm Claire Segal. It's Claire_Segal on, I think, Instagram and TikTok. I think so.
We will put the links in the show notes, but
Perfect.
definitely I love Claire's TikTok. It's so good. She's always
Oh, thank
inspiring me,
you.
so go and check it out. Thanks so much for being here today.